So the question always comes to, can we avert dangerous climate change? We already see climate change going on. What can we do about it now that we understand something about the nature of what's causing it? So here are some thoughts. So these are possible strategies for reducing global warming. First is reduce the amount of sunlight striking the Earth's surface. Okay? And how would you do this? Control the sun's brightness. This reminds me of the myth of Icarus, who tried to fly to the sun. Well, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't even know how to do it. So that's a thought, but I would forget that one. What else? Control the Earth's reflectivity. Wow, that's possible maybe. We need some form of sunscreen for the Earth. That's a possibility. And indeed, some very smart people, Edward Teller, Lowell Wood, and Rick Hyde, put in 1997 this idea out of prospects for physics-based modulation of global change. And then Paul Crutzen has talked about albedo enhancement by stratospheric sulfur injections to form an aerosol that will reflect the light. That's 2006. And there is ways actually of making cheap access to the stratosphere. You can indeed use balloons to carry up sulfur dioxide and release it. Now, these are called geoengineering solutions. And they are actually scary because can we figure out all the consequences of doing any of these things? And they don't take away the fact that if you still produce lots of CO2, you're going to acidify the oceans and have other effects. But they are some possibilities to consider. And there's others that involve like trying to unroll mylar sheets up there that will be reflective. You don't have to make much of a change to actually have a big change this way, because it's a surface effect that you're doing if you change the reflectivity. Now, there are other strategies. Here are possible strategies for reducing global warming. Reduce the amount of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. How would we do that? First of all, learn to use less energy. Some of my friends claim this is the best way. Indeed, some think the only way. I think, though, you have to be careful about this because my experience is that to tell people you just got to now change your style of living. Forget about air conditioning. They're not going to. Various creature comforts are going to win out. And people are not going to do this very willingly. So, yes, we can learn to use less energy. And certainly the easiest way is conservation of energy. And I'm all for that. We have much to learn from some other countries in the United States here. I go, for example, to Europe, and I go into buildings at nighttime whose lights turn on when I walk into the building and they turn off as I walk and enter my room in a hotel, etc. We don't have as much of that here, and we could so easily. And they do save energy, no question. Learn to use more carbon-free energy sources. Well, sure. Again, we've seen, though, that 85% of our energy is coming from fossil fuels, and so it needs a big change to make this happen. Learn how to sequester carbon from carbon-rich energy sources or the atmosphere. Sequester means to hide. How do we do this? Lots of research is now needed here. Can we make bugs which eat preferentially the carbon dioxide and turn it into, for example, carbonate, which gets buried, for example, in the ocean? Can we learn to actually capture the carbon dioxide at power plants and use it, for example, in other chemistry to make interesting products or to bury it somewhere? All these are interesting questions that are worth exploring. For a long time, no one would pay attention to these questions because you didn't need to. I think today, as I'll try to explain, you really want to. To what extent are we certain that carbon dioxide leads to global warming? Well, I think fairly certain. And how much global warming? Here, we're less certain. And for me, the argument isn't necessarily to get certainty here. It's more like an insurance policy. You really want to do something because you're insuring yourself against a possible disaster. And that's what drives me to make that type of conclusion. Next is Another strategy for reducing global warming is exercise some control over population growth, because we see that's part of the equation of why we need so much more energy. Now, what am I speaking about? First of all, population growth is easy to look at, and you see it taking off the way it has been. And here it's looking like it's going to go to 9.1 billion. People argue about this by about 2050. And I was saying 10 billion a moment ago. These numbers are uncertain, but we get some idea about this. And here are the numbers of what it's been like. The UN estimates that about 40% of all pregnancies worldwide are unintended. And so this now says to me that we have a chance to do something about this. Just helping women to avoid unintended pregnancies would have a huge impact on this question. And I'm really speaking about non-coercive ways to drastically reduce fertility. What's involved? Education, access to birth control, and economic opportunity for women. Turns out, believe it or not, the last, which probably depends on the first, is the most effective from what we've seen of what's going on. Now, there are probably the need for a dual strategy or more than one strategy in doing all this. We have to maximize energy efficiency and minimize energy use. And we have to develop new sources of clean energy. Now, be careful. There's no form of any energy generation which is quote-unquote totally clean. Even using the sun, of course, means a shadow. It means that something underneath is in the dark. And that's not altogether clean. Okay. So here are some conclusions I reached from this type of study, which has been a hobby of mine, to try to understand the nature and the challenges we face with global warming from a scientific perspective. First of all, not all problems have simple solutions. And this is not a simple problem at all. Do not be surprised to find what is really needed is a portfolio of different approaches. We don't know what will work, and probably more than one thing will work. So we have to try a bunch. And for me, to take no action is not an acceptable alternative of not knowing what exactly to do. We do know what to do, and there's many things to do. Now, lots of sustainability discussions can be consumed by, I would call, gloom. They can easily remind you of the opening of the Woody Allen's classic essay, My Address to the Graduates. Let me do that from memory. I think it goes something like this. Today we are at a crossroad. One road leads to hopelessness and despair. The other to total extinction. Let us pray we choose wisely. This talk is not that. This is not a talk of gloom. This is a talk of opportunity. Let's stop and take stock of where the human race has been. Think back. Think back to what it was like in the early 1800s. What was it like then? There were people saying the world couldn't go on further. The so-called Malthus group, right? We're all going to run out of food. Transportation was, what was it based on? Horsepower primarily. And for that matter, otherwise you had to use wind in the sails of ships to move somewhere. You weren't getting very far, very fast this way in the 1800s. And pollution, there was terrible pollution. And I think nobody today would want to go back to horses with our population as a form of transportation. The pollution would be horrendous. Okay, let's think what else you had. You had food. And by and large, your food wasn't safe. People regularly got poisoned with the food that they took in. This is the 1800s. We've made great changes, and I expect we'll have to make great changes again. Many changes will take place. One of the big hopes is, here comes the sun. Take a look at this next slide. Here's a fact. More energy from the sun strikes the Earth's surface in an hour than mankind uses presently in a year. That's an amazing fact. Let me prove to you this fact is correct. The average energy consumption in the world is something like 15 times 10 to the 12th watts. Okay? And the average radiant energy from the sun is 1.368 kilowatts per square meter. We just went through that. The cross-section of the Earth, when you work it out, knowing It takes about 25,000 miles to go around the Earth in terms of circumference, right? And knowing the circumference is 2 pi r and working it all out. Okay, the total radiant energy hitting the Earth, therefore, is 1.74 times 10 to the 17 watts. 10 to the 17 is a much bigger number than 10 to the 12th. About 10 to the 5th, 100,000 times bigger. That's a lot. Okay, it won't take much to get us there. And we have a real chance of utilizing the sun in one form or another. Yes, some revolutionary changes will need to take place, but they're already started. And you can see it. For example, the car is continually evolving. Much of our needs right now for oil comes from gasoline, a liquid fuel to drive cars. But we're learning now how to make hybrid cars, and then later on it seems like battery-driven cars. Again, as we can localize the sources of energy generation, the battery getting charged with electricity that comes from power plants, we have a hope of controlling pollution. If we can make further breakthroughs, for example, so much energy is lost now in conductivity from the power plant to our homes, with possibilities of making, for example, room temperature superconductors. No, I don't know how to do it today, but if it happened, it would change the world. These things are going to happen, but they're going to take science and scientists to make it happen. You really need to work on this. My concluding thoughts. We have the scientific knowledge to reduce threats from global warming. Chemistry will play a key role in meeting the challenges of sustainability. It won't be just chemistry alone. It'll be many other things. It'll be physics, it'll be engineering, it'll be science put together, written large. But certainly all these problems very much involve understanding materials, what their limits are, making new materials, thinking about things in a very logical and scientific way. The last thing I would add is it remains unclear whether we have the political will to make some of the tough choices needed. In this case, we have to all talk to each other and bring everyone along to understand that the world will be changing and we can make those changes work in our favor. The countries who work on this and first develop the means of generating more energy that's acceptable to everybody, that's sustainable, will indeed have a great advantage over everyone else. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you.